shelf?
If it's in a word or it's in a look, you can't get rid of the Babadook. A rumbling sound, then 3 sharp knocks.
Babadook, dook, dook.
That's when you'll know he's around. You'll see him if you...
Hi guys, Vince here once again, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my gut reaction review for The Babadook, which is an Australian horror film dating back to 2014, which has gained over the last couple of years something of a cult following, and following it having consistently strong reviews across the board, and it seemed like the sort of film that I'd be attracted to, I decided to jump in and watch it, and of course share my review with you guys briefly here today. So first of all, one of the things I really want to point out is it has a very interesting evolution of the plot. The way the film develops and moves forward, even though I actually had some level of pre-existing understanding of the film, I was quite surprised and impressed, in fact, with the way in which it evolves and moves on over the course of the film. It really does keep you guessing right up until the end, and as I said, I really wasn't quite expecting things to go the way they did. The action and the sort of, I guess you could say, the most interesting scenes of the film really develop nicely and don't feel overdone or inauthentic, and yeah, it really does a good job of I guess you could say having the effect without making things campy or cheesy at any point. It's worth pointing out as well, I'll be very careful not to ruin anything here, but it's not a jump scare type film either, which is I was very pleasantly surprised with, and I'm not quite what I was expecting, I have to say, given the nature of the film and how it works out, and particularly given that the child is a very prominent part of the film. Overall, quite frankly, I wasn't sure what quite to expect in terms of horror here, and that's part of, I think, the attraction, and part of the reason I'm not going to go into too much detail there, because the trailer itself plays quite sort of fast and loose with how things are developed, and the idea I had certainly wasn't the way things went. It is fair to say, though, without giving too much away here, that there is definitely more of a psychological edge to the film, and the way they play with that and really play with the characters and the dynamics there really do a good job of engrossing you and making you feel that this is a very real scenario, which is obviously a very difficult thing to do in horror films, but one that they achieve very well here. Despite, of course, the fact that it is a horror movie, it's also worth highlighting that this movie does go to some very dark places, and I mean some really dark topics, you know, with the characters and the nature of the film, which I personally wasn't really expecting. And for those of you that are uncomfortable with some of the darker sides of humanity, you might not enjoy this so much. However, it does culminate in a very unique premise, which I've honestly never come across before. I've watched my fair share of horror films, but I was really impressed here with how things unfolded. Even as the credits rolled afterwards, I was still, and to some extent even to this point now, I was really thinking over parts of the film, how things play out and what it's really trying to tell you. And for me, that's always a good sign, particularly as far as plot is concerned. The overall aesthetic itself here as well is subtle, and it's not overdone at any point. At no point does it feel like it's trying to jump out at you or using any ridiculous horror tropes. I would say at some point it's, and this is debatable, it is almost overly bleak. It does feel as though it's just throwing these things at you, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. But at the same time, most of the greatest horror films you probably care to mention would fit into that. And if you look at things such as The Exorcist, The Walking Dead, things don't tend to go particularly well or really perk up. It's not that type of film, and that's certainly not the case here, and things do get increasingly more bleak as the film goes on. And what it manages to achieve here, which is another I find quite difficult thing to achieve in horror films, is that it's consistent. There aren't these ridiculous peaks and troughs that you find with a lot of the weaker horror films, and a lot of particularly films which rely on jump scares, where you feel as though you're constantly it's constantly going back and forth, and it's okay, now we're in a scary moment, but now we're not, so you can sort of relax. That's not how it works here. You're constantly wondering where this is going and how far things are going to go, which is an interesting position to be in. The overall acting of the film as well is very impressive. It's very consistent throughout, and the child itself, his acting is really really fantastic, and quite frankly I'm amazed that they managed to get the performance they did out of him. And it really goes alongside to complement the rest of the cast who are also very good throughout, to make it feel like a very authentic film and really immerse you into these characters. They feel real, you can feel their pain, you can relate to even some of the darker side of what these characters are potentially doing, which is a very difficult thing to achieve once again, particularly in horror films. Ultimately, it's really a film that's a very unique premise, and that's what I guess I would come back to just before wrapping up. The action works together well, it all culminates together well. What I would just say perhaps is that there are quite a few, not major, but plot holes from a logical perspective, as you would find with almost any horror film, of course. Particularly as we draw towards the end, that did sort of make me ask a few questions and feel as though there was some points which were more unanswered than others. But I really just decided to wrap up overall and say I was very happy with the Babadook. Even after hearing the high praise and the high benchmark I was trying to avoid, but I have to say I had in my mind from other reviews and from the reputation that this film has built up, I really did find that it's built a very unique experience which I haven't come across with anything else. There's nothing I could obviously compare this to. The closest I would probably say is The Exorcist, and it's very different to that, but there's a couple of passing resemblances, particularly in terms of plot, that I suppose you could point out. But overall it's a very good film, it's well crafted, the plot's solid, the scares aren't cheap, you never knew quite where things were going to go. And with that said, I'm going to give this an 8.8 out of 10. I'd highly recommend this to any fan of horror, particularly anyone who's looking for something a bit different beyond your usual cheap tropes and repeated plots and rhetoric which we see again and again, zombie movies, horror, werewolf movies, vampires, all that stuff. If you want something a bit different, this is very, very much different. So yeah, hope that was enjoyable for you guys. Definitely go in and check it out, particularly if you are a horror fan. Thank you for joining me. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more fantastic horror reviews and other general content which I put out. I don't just do movie reviews, I do how-tos, game reviews, trailer, all sorts of stuff for you to check out and enjoy. So yeah, don't forget to check it out, and we'll see you again next time. Cheers.